Let's go check out the Intrepid Museum. I think I got in for free with a Bank America card.
Emil, Virgil,
Robert, Patrick, Mo, Nathan, Burris, Hackett,
Lewis, Nick, Reginald, Elmo, Wallace,
William,
James, Cecil,
Vernon, Fred, Howard, Harry, Monroe, Dan, G.
Harold, Horace, Earl, Arthur, Charles, Leslie,
Lawrence Jefferson Robinson.
On November 25th, 1944, on this spot on the hangar deck of the Intrepid, 2 kamikazes hit the Intrepid, penetrating the wooden deck above, getting the aircraft down here to the hangar deck. Their bombs on board the aircraft dislodging and rolling down through the hangar deck, catching many of the aircraft that were stored down here on fire. These aircraft were fully fueled and armed at the time. 68 seamen lost their life during this kamikaze attack, but they were able to get the fire out, and 3 months later they were able to get the USS Intrepid back into battle again. That kamikaze attack in November of '44 happened near the Philippines. Here's an old TBM Avenger. One of my favorite old airplanes, TBM, the Turkey, the Wright 2600 power, 14-cylinder radial engine, the heaviest single-engine aircraft in World War II, second only by the P-47. These aircraft I'm fairly familiar with because after the war, these were some of the first aircraft that were converted into fire bombers, and I used to work at a place where we took the old fire bombers and converted them back into military configuration for various museums. And some of the work I got to do was installing these engines, getting all the accessories in there, and then a guy named Cecil we worked with would do beautiful sheet metal work and restore these Bombay doors, and then I was able to get in there and work on all the hydraulics, get the hydraulic lines in there and replumbed. We got these hydraulic systems back to work again on the folding wings. It wasn't on this particular airplane, but on a similar TBM. Of course, the TBM had the 30 cal machine gun in the front, a 50 cal machine gun on the turret, and a little 30 cal machine gun back here on the tail. Look at this, they even had leading edge slots for great slow performance. And of course the whole concept, the mission of the TBM was to carry that 2,000-pound single torpedo and sink ships. There's the turret where the 50 cal machine gun was located there. A whole bunch of radio gear. And let's see if we can find the tail section here. Of course, tail hook for tail hook landings. And right back, and you can't see it on this one, but right ahead of the tail wheel there would be another little 30 cal machine gun sticking out of the tail of the TBM. Of course, they still used fabric control surfaces at the time, and was a tough old bird, the Grumman Iron Works, designed by Grumman, and served many years also as a fire bomber, especially up in Canada, and then here in Northern California, or back home in Northern California. This was something else we did at RPM Aviation, going through high school and colleges. Ralph bought a whole bunch of these old ball turrets, and we started putting these back together into their original form. Electric powered, very tight fit, single 50 cal machine gun. During the Vietnam War, a lot of these A4 Sky Raiders flew off of the Intrepid. Heineman's Hot Rod, a great design by Douglas Aircraft, and Ed Heinemann. Short little wingspan here meant they didn't have to fold the wings up on the carrier deck. Two 20 mil cannons up in the front there, and of course about 10,000 pounds of load carrying capability of a combination of bombs or fuel tanks. That's a center fuel tank right there, so they could actually air refuel each other. These two A4s could send and receive fuel from each other using that big fuel tank there in a hose system. Vortex generators, latest technology, leading edge slats, and of course a big old tail hook enabling it to catch the wire. Just a fantastic design. And there's the receiver for the in-flight refueling where you capture the basket. The A4D Skyhawk, Heinemann's hot rod. The different jobs of the folks that work on board the carrier can be identified by the color of their jerseys. Yellow shirts are the guys that are launching the aircraft. White shirts, I guess you could call them management types. Red shirts, ordnance. Brown shirts would be the equivalent of crew chiefs in the Air Force, work on individual aircraft. Blue shirts move the aircraft around the carrier and hand them off to the yellow shirt guys to launch them. Grapes or purple shirt handle the fuel, and the green shirts handle the catapult launching system. 3,000 men to run this aircraft carrier. There's the Concorde. Any guys ever fly this or get a ride in this? I remember watching this fly out of JFK, and man, it was a tremendously loud airplane, and it just would stagger through the sky on its initial climb out of JFK heading over to London. Very, very expensive, loads of fuel, but of course supersonic speeds. I think there's one still sitting out the runway there at, isn't that still sitting out there at JFK? Or over at London Heathrow, that's it. Well, the cruise ship's in the way, can't really see, but somewhere up there on the Hudson is where Sully put the Airbus down after he hit a flock of geese, flaming out both engines. Check out some of these aircraft on the deck. One of my favorite aircraft, as you already know on this channel, the T-38 Northrop. This is the NASA T-38 with the two J-58 engines, about 3,000 pounds of thrust each in full afterburner. I got to get a report to you guys about the recent spate of T-38 accidents in the Air Force Pilot Training Command. The T-38's day has come. It's long overdue. It's an aircraft for a previous generation of pilots. It was designed to teach pilots to fly Century Series aircraft, supersonic aircraft from the days of old. And it is soon going to be replaced by a new aircraft, a Boeing Saab consortium called the T-7 Red Tail. Looks like a very interesting design. It's going to be a single engine, supersonic, tandem seat jet trainer that will soon be replacing the T-38. But the T-38's days are numbered very shortly here as a pilot trainer in the U.S. Air Force. Great trainer, but a handful of an airplane to fly. It washed out a lot of really good candidates out of pilot training. A couple of MiGs, an F-8 Crusader, and the venerable F-4 Phantom, the Rhino. This is the other main aircraft that the T-38 was designed to train pilots to fly back in the day. Proving that given enough thrust, any aerodynamic design will fly. Hawker Harrier with your vertical takeoff capabilities. A bunch of helicopters on display. Huey boat, Cobra, still got the gun on it. And this thing, the Sikorsky with the big round engine, because they had the big right radial 1300 R1300 engine mounted right up in here. Big loud son of a gun. An H-52 turbine engine. Now here's the Sky Raider, the A1D Sky Raider, the SPAD, the Wright 3350 powered. One of the last single-engine recip fighters ever designed after World War II. Probably, let's see how it compares to weight to the TBM. It might have even been heavier than the TBM, but was used quite a bit throughout the Vietnam War, both by the Air Force and Navy. Here's an airplane familiar to everybody on the Blanco Lirio channel. It's basically an S2, a Grumman S2 tracker. This is the E1B version. I think they call this a tracer, and it's got this huge radome on the top of it for submarine chasing, and then it's got the two vertical tails instead of the single vertical tail on the back. The two Wright 1820 radial engines, and of course this is what we use today, the converted turboprop converted ones that we still use today at CAL FIRE to fight the fires there in California. F-16, looks like this was an old New York Guard aircraft. This was the plane I wanted to go fly in the Air Force. They made me an instructor pilot instead. They said you could talk and fly at the same time. Grumman A6 Intruder. Great book, great movie, Flight of the Intruder. By the way, another great book is back over there on the Sky Raider, My Secret War, Richard Drury. Great stuff. And of course the Navy F-14 Tomcat. Another great, strong Grumman design.
This is the sully cell. This has the General Electric.
SR-71, look at this. Blackbird out of Beale Air Force Base. Home of the Recce Squadron. So I got in the can a real good thorough review of this aircraft when we went back up to the museum in Oregon, not Tillamook, but the other one, Evergreen Museum. They have an SR-71 on display up there, and I got a great tour of the aircraft from the docent, and I'll have to dig up that footage and tell you all the neat factoids about the SR-71 that I learned on that visit. Just a fascinating design by Kelly Johnson from the Lockheed Skunk Works. Got this aircraft out in record time despite all the hurdles, a lot of titanium, nearly impossible to work with. They had to sort out the, I think these are J58 engines, they had to sort out the subsonic flow of air into these engines using these retractable cones here. So at supersonic speeds, these cones need to move in and out of here. This is all just airspace ahead of the engine is located way back there so that you could get the airflow subsonic going into the engine. I forget what they call it on the SR-71, but if you did not get that right in the original designs, I think that was a fairly mechanical design, not so well automated. If you didn't get that subsonic flow right into that engine, it would roll back on you dramatically, and these two engines are so widely spaced apart that you'd get a huge adverse yaw, and you could potentially easily flame out both engines in these sort of situations. So especially if you're at Mach 3 or so and you just start a gradual turn and you disrupt the airflow into that engine, it could be a real problem. They got that sorted out though with a little more automatic control of the inlet spikes to these jet engines on the SR-71. Of course, all used for reconnaissance. Real exotic camera bays are located up here in the aircraft, able to get high-speed reconnaissance information, but it was still film at the time, so you still had to wait for the film process before you could get the timely intelligence out to people on the ground. But with the speed of the aircraft, you could get to the incident quickly and above SAM missile altitude, get in and out of there safely, and get the intel back to the folks that need it. One of my fondest memories in ROTC there at Sacramento is joining the KC-135 air tanker for air refueling of the SR-71. Oh, this had been about, I don't know, in the late 80s. And the SR-71 always had 2 tankers ready, or used 2 tankers on each departure. They took off with a reduced fuel load. Not only did the fuel leak out of the aircraft because of the design, but primarily I believe it was to improve their takeoff performance, to not carry the weight of that fuel. As soon as they would take off, hit a tanker, fuel up, go do a mission, and then hit another tanker as necessary. And or they had the second tanker as a backup in the event that the first tanker crapped out on them. Neat machine.
You're directing the ship. Now, there may be a dozen people in this compartment at any given time, so what happens? How do you know that that instruction is for you? Well, first of all, you're the only person in this compartment that gets this, actually you're the only person aboard the ship who gets his instructions in terms of left or right as opposed to starboard and port. Secondly, officer of the deck walks in, no matter however you pronounce that.
Tachometer.
It's cold. Pretty well. What's down here? Kevin. Oh, the other view.
That's the other view of the captain's bridge.
Appendix.
High class accommodations.
All right.
Tell me about the engines on board this
Well,
vessel.
there's 4 of them. You have, and they're diesel driven, and diesel driven steam. And they each will come up to about 150,000 horsepower.
Ooh.
Yeah, and the ship can do a maximum. The maximum speed here would have been 33 knots, but obviously you don't run it at 33 knots for more than about 15 minutes, or else you'll turn the engines into hamburger or chocolate chips, depending upon what you're thinking of. Oh, gentlemen, this is a perfectly proportioned compartment. Did you think the overhead is too low? Yeah, there's something wrong with you.
So,
Because the Navy doesn't make mistakes.
does this just send a signal to the engine room? What you want?
Yeah, basically there's another contraption down there, looks pretty much like it. It's actually on the wall like this. So you tell them all ahead 2/3, and that's your speed, that's your order, and the white would be their acknowledgement.
What you get, yeah. They're way down there.
You don't see very much, do you? You don't have to.
Wow, here it is, an actual space shuttle. First time I've ever looked at one of these up close. This is the Enterprise, which was apparently just a prototype space shuttle used only for the glide test portion of the program. This one never went up into space. Just piggybacked on the back of the 747 and was glided back to Earth. So since Enterprise was just a prototype used for glide testing only, these tiles here are made of rubber. They're not the actual tiles that were used on the space vehicle. They just needed to replicate the weight of the tiles. But over here on this landing gear door, here's some actual tiles, and this is a display showing you the kind of damage these tiles could withstand from hitting debris, either on departure, on takeoff, or when orbiting. And so each tile, of course, is carefully numbered and located that way. So these are some of the actual thermal tiles versus the rubber tiles right here from the prototype. Here's some of the high-speed wind test models made out of stainless steel. Testing some other body shapes here. Looks like the panel from a C-141. We used a lot of these old tape gauges in that aircraft. During World War II, Intrepid was a straight carrier deck style Essex class carrier where the aircraft took off on the bow of the ship and were recovered, catching the wires here at the aft end of the ship. Here you can see the 4 screws of the 4 diesel steam engines. And then for the Cold War, Intrepid was rebuilt for the jet age with a proper angle deck. So here you could launch 2 with the catapult and recover 1 nearly simultaneously with this angle deck design, and a much safer design for boltering if in the event you had to go around. The Intrepid's assembled with 9 platforms, if you will, with the hangar deck being here on the 4th level where all the aircraft are. Now, a lot of the fuel on the Intrepid is stored way down here, and a lot of the Japanese carriers had their fuel at about this level, so that when those Japanese carriers were bombed, they were frequently much easierly sunk because they got to the fuel tanks located right there. But when they kamikazed the Intrepid, it did not catch the fuel on fire. Only the fuel that was on board the aircraft and the ordnance that was on board the aircraft at the time. Well, thanks for joining me on this tour of the Intrepid today. Thanks so much all you service members for your service to the country, and for everybody that supports this channel. See you here.